The morning the storm inside me really started, I remember sitting at my desk, staring at the screen that glowed brighter than my mood. The office was buzzing the way it always did, phones ringing, the clack of keyboards filling the air, the artificial hum of the fluorescent lights making everything feel just a little more suffocating. On the surface, nothing had changed. But inside me, something had broken beyond repair. I had been working in this company for nearly 4 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and I had carved out a place for myself. I put in more hours than anyone, stayed late when deadlines loomed, answered emails at ridiculous times of night. Everyone knew I was reliable. My manager, the one person I had trusted above all, had always said I was her right hand. She confided in me, leaned on me, even promised me the next promotion that opened up. And I believed her. I gave her everything, my loyalty, my hard work, even my personal time. Then came the knife. Not a literal one, but it cut deeper than steel. She took credit for a project that I had built from the ground up. Weeks of research, countless nights of working from home while my friends went out, ideas that I had nurtured, gone, stolen, wrapped up neatly in her presentation as if they had sprung from her mind. She stood at the head of the conference table, smiling like the queen of innovation, while I sat there feeling the blood drain from my face. Nobody in the room knew that every single word she was saying was mine. She didn't even glance at me, didn't acknowledge me, didn't give me a shred of recognition. Worse, the directors applauded. They called her a visionary. They hinted that her future at the company was looking even brighter. And me? I was invisible. That moment, something inside me hardened. I didn't walk out of that room the same person who had walked in. I still smiled, still clapped politely, but my smile was glass, and my hands were trembling as they touched. Deep down, I had already made a decision. If she thought she could build her career out of my bones, she was going to learn what it felt like to choke on the same air she had stolen. For the next few weeks, I stayed quiet. Outwardly, I was the same, obedient, helpful, always there to pick up the slack. She didn't suspect a thing. But inside, I was taking notes. I paid attention to her habits. I noticed the way she depended on me to cover her gaps. She didn't really understand the systems we worked with, she just leaned on me to handle the details. She forwarded me her emails to draft responses, and she asked me to fix her mistakes before anyone else saw them. She was so used to me cleaning up after her that she had grown careless. I also noticed something else. She loved attention more than anything. The praise from upper management was her lifeblood. She thrived on being the center of admiration, and she guarded that image like it was gold. Any hint of incompetence, any whisper that she wasn't as brilliant as she pretended, and she panicked. I had seen her scramble when a minor error almost reached the directors. She had begged me to fix it before they noticed. That was the crack in her armor. Slowly, I began to shift the balance. At first, I made small changes, subtle, unnoticeable. If she asked me to draft an email for her, I left out a key detail, just enough to make her look a little sloppy. When she presented slides I had prepared, I made sure 1 or 2 figures were just vague enough to raise questions. Nothing that could be traced back to me, nothing that would destroy her immediately, but enough to plant seeds of doubt. And it worked. The first time a director asked her for clarification and she stumbled, I felt a dark satisfaction swell inside me. She recovered quickly, but I saw the flicker of unease in her eyes. She didn't like not having the answers. Meanwhile, I played my role to perfection. I was still the helpful employee, the quiet supporter. Whenever she stumbled, I stepped in just enough to cover it, making it look like I was simply doing my job. Nobody suspected that I was the one pulling the strings, that I was carefully loosening the threads of her perfect mask. But small stumbles weren't enough. I wanted her to feel the same humiliation I had felt in that conference room. I wanted her to know what it was like to be betrayed by the one person you trusted most. And so, I planned. The project she had stolen from me had opened the door to a new client, one of the biggest the company had ever landed. She was put in charge of maintaining that relationship, which meant constant communication, endless reports, and flawless performance. She leaned on me heavily, just as I expected. I knew the details of the client's needs better than anyone. I knew the timelines, the deliverables, the pressure that came with it. She needed me more than ever, and that dependence was the leash I was tightening around her neck. I started by carefully curating the information I gave her. If the client requested updates, I filtered what I passed along. I made sure she was always one step behind, always slightly unprepared. She still looked competent enough to keep her position, but the cracks were widening. The client began to notice delays, minor mistakes, inconsistencies in her reports. She blamed the client's miscommunication at first, then her team, but she never thought to question me. Why would she? I was her most trusted employee. And then came the opportunity one had been waiting for. The client scheduled a major presentation, one that would determine the next phase of the contract. It was critical, and she knew it. She asked me to prepare the materials, as always, and I did, meticulously. Every slide was polished, every number double-checked. But one key figure, one crucial piece of data, I altered just enough to contradict itself later in the presentation. When the day came, she walked into that boardroom glowing with confidence. She started strong, speaking with her usual poise. But when the slide with the altered figure appeared, the client interrupted. They asked her to explain the discrepancy. She froze. I watched her eyes flicker across the numbers, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. She stumbled through an explanation, but it only made things worse. The client's faces hardened, suspicion clear in their eyes. By the end of the meeting, her glow had dimmed. She smiled tightly, promised to send clarifications, but the damage was done. And I was the one who offered to help her fix it afterward. She looked at me with gratitude, never realizing that I was the reason she had drowned in the first place. After that, things began unraveling quickly. The client grew less patient with her, less trusting. The directors began asking more questions, probing deeper into her reports. And each time, I was there in the background, subtly making sure she failed just enough to look unreliable. But I wasn't finished. I didn't just want her career to falter. I wanted her to feel what I had felt, the sting of betrayal, the collapse of trust. And so I set the stage for the final act. She had once told me that the directors valued transparency above all else. They hated dishonesty more than mistakes. So I crafted a situation where her dishonesty would shine through. With careful timing, I drafted a report that contained information she hadn't verified. I left it in her inbox, making it look like I had completed it for her approval. I even highlighted the parts she would most likely skip over. When she submitted it as her own, it contained a glaring error that couldn't be brushed aside. The fallout was immediate. The client complained directly to the directors, furious at the oversight. In the emergency meeting that followed, they confronted her with the evidence. She tried to explain, but the words tangled on her tongue. They asked her why she hadn't verified the data, why she had presented it as accurate. Her face turned pale, her voice cracked, and for the first time, she looked small. I sat there quietly, taking notes, my expression neutral. Inside, though, I felt the fire of vindication burn through me. She had taken my work, my ideas, my recognition. Now I was taking hers. But this was only the beginning. When the directors ended that meeting, the room carried an invisible weight. She walked out first, shoulders stiff, her steps hurried as though leaving the scene could erase what had just happened. I followed behind her, deliberately slower, masking the steady rhythm of victory beating in my chest. Nobody looked at me with suspicion. To them, I was still the dependable shadow who kept things running. For the next few days, she was restless. I watched her in her office, pacing with her phone glued to her ear, calling the client repeatedly, trying to mend what was already broken. She spoke in hushed tones, her voice sharpening when the answers didn't satisfy her. When she hung up, she buried her face in her hands. To anyone else, she might have looked overworked, stressed by the pressures of her position. But I knew better. I had placed those cracks there, widening them with precision. I didn't let her rest. Whenever she asked for updates, I delivered them half a step behind schedule, just late enough to make her anxious. Whenever she needed information, I filtered it until she was juggling inconsistencies. She clung to me more tightly than ever, relying on me to keep her afloat. And all the while, I was the one tugging her underwater. It wasn't long before word spread in whispers around the office. People began noticing her slipping. She snapped at colleagues more often, forgot details she used to recite flawlessly, and looked increasingly disheveled in morning meetings. The polished woman who once commanded attention was unraveling. I kept my face neutral, supportive even, but inside, I savored each moment. Still, whispers weren't enough. I wanted her fall to be undeniable, visible to everyone, a downfall she couldn't climb out of. So I gave fate a little nudge. One afternoon, she asked me to prepare a summary for the directors ahead of a quarterly review. It was her responsibility, but she didn't have the energy or focus to handle it. I said yes, knowing this was the perfect stage. I built the document carefully, every page gleaming with polished professionalism. But within it, I left subtle contradictions. A number that didn't align with an earlier report. A timeline that conflicted with the client's expectations. Not obvious errors, at least not until someone looked closely. And they did. The quarterly review was brutal. The directors questioned her relentlessly, picking apart the inconsistencies. She tried to explain, fumbling through excuses, and I sat there with my pen in hand, taking diligent notes, as if I were documenting every moment out of responsibility. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. Their quiet disappointment was worse, heavier, and it crushed her. Afterward, she avoided everyone. She retreated to her office, closed the door, and stayed there late into the night. Sometimes I left at 9, and her light was still on. I imagined her staring at her computer, rereading the same reports, wondering where she had gone wrong, never realizing that I had guided every misstep. Her once perfect reputation was now fractured. But betrayal isn't complete until it mirrors itself, until the traitor feels the sting of being deceived by someone they trusted completely. For weeks, I waited for the right moment, and it arrived sooner than I expected. The client, exhausted by repeated errors, requested a video call with both her and the directors. It was their final attempt at salvaging the partnership. She panicked, of course. She begged me to help her prepare, saying she couldn't afford another failure. I agreed, my tone calm, reassuring. She clung to that lifeline, not knowing I was about to cut it. I built the presentation for her. Every slide gleamed, every number aligned, every word chosen to impress. She rehearsed it 3 times with me, and I nodded at her improvements. She was nervous but confident enough to face them. I wanted her to feel that confidence, to believe she was ready. That was the sweetness of it. The higher she climbed, the harder the fall. The day of the call, she sat in the conference room with the directors at her side. The client appeared on the screen, their faces serious, their patience worn thin. She launched into her presentation, smooth at first, almost regaining her old rhythm. For a moment, I wondered if she might actually escape the trap. But then the slide appeared, the one I had crafted with deliberate precision. On its surface, it was flawless. But the sources I had cited at the bottom, the ones she hadn't verified, contradicted her own earlier reports. Not just a small oversight this time, but a glaring discrepancy, undeniable and damning. The client pounced. They demanded an explanation, their voices sharp with frustration. She froze, her polished mask shattering. The directors turned to her, their eyes narrowing. She stammered, flipping through notes, searching for something that wasn't there. Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. And then it happened. One of the directors turned to me. "You worked on this too, didn't you?" The room tilted for a heartbeat. This was the pivot, the moment I had been waiting for. I chose my words carefully, letting them fall like stones. I prepared the materials under her guidance. I assumed everything had already been verified. It was the truth, in its sharpest form. No lies, no overt betrayal, just a subtle shift of responsibility that placed the weight squarely on her shoulders. And in their eyes, it landed. The call ended badly. The client's trust was gone, their contract now dangling by a thread. The directors looked at her not with disappointment this time, but with something colder, doubt. Serious, irreversible doubt. After the meeting, she pulled me into her office. Her hands trembled as she closed the door. Did you know about those numbers?" she whispered, her voice breaking. I met her eyes and said nothing for a moment, just long enough for the silence to deepen the wound. Then I shook my head, feigning confusion. "I thought you checked them. You always said transparency was everything." Her face collapsed. For the first time I saw it, her realization that she had trusted me blindly, leaned on me completely, and that trust had failed her. She didn't accuse me. She couldn't. She had built her career on my work, stolen my ideas, used my loyalty. How could she now admit she had been betrayed by the same person she had exploited? That night, I left the office late. Her light was still on, but this time I didn't imagine her working. I imagined her unraveling, questioning every choice, every trust, every moment she had relied on me. And I smiled in the dark parking lot, the satisfaction colder and sharper than any applause could have been. The next week, the client terminated their contract. The directors were furious, but they didn't fire her immediately. They demoted her, stripped her of her authority, and reassigned her to smaller projects. Her office was taken away. She was moved to a cubicle, one that used to belong to a junior employee. The woman who once strutted through the halls like she owned them now sat in a cramped corner, ignored by most, pitied by a few. I walked past her desk once, carrying files she used to assign to me. She didn't look up. She just stared at her screen, her shoulders hunched, her eyes hollow. That was when the full weight of it hit me. I had done it. I had taken back what she stole from me. Not by shouting or accusing, but by letting her collapse under the very trust she had demanded. And yet, as satisfying as it was, there was no cheering, no applause, no recognition. My revenge was silent, hidden, known only to me. But perhaps that was the point. She had humiliated me in front of everyone. I had humiliated her in front of herself. In the end, that was enough.